Welcome everybody to my first video of 2023. I hope you had a good festive season and I wish you all the best for this year. Now this video is all about why I decided to buy this camera, the original Canon EOS R6 mirrorless camera, and how I think it can benefit me compared to the Canon 1DX, which I've had for many years, and as you can see, I've still got this camera with me today. I did make a video all about the potential benefits and whether I should upgrade, which I made about a couple of months ago, so I don't want to repeat myself too much today. If you want to watch that video, then click on the link up on the screen, and there'll also be a link in the description box below. Now, one of the main things with mirrorless cameras is simply a difference in size and weight. And as you can see, this mirrorless camera compared to this DSLR, it's just a massive difference. It literally is really, this is half as small, and it is almost exactly half the weight of the 1DX as well. Now, I realise that a lot of the weight with your gear is coming from the lens. Of course it is, and I've got one very big heavy lens, 500mm. But still, less is less. Having less weight is just going to make your life a little bit easier. And certainly with the heavier camera, sometimes I can feel it on my joints, like particularly on my wrists, hand holding it, because it is very heavy. And already just using this camera briefly on my fixed 400mm lens, I can definitely feel a difference. It really feels a lot easier to hand hold. And when I've attached it also to the macro 100mm lens, that just feels massively different to me. It just feels light as a feather hand holding that on the mirrorless camera. And also for traveling, it can be really helpful for traveling as well, just to reduce that weight. One of the biggest factors for me in getting a mirrorless camera was the lack of noise that the camera makes. And this is just fantastic. This is one of the best things about mirrorless cameras, is they're just so quiet. Now, if you're using a DSLR like this DX in particular, they can just be so noisy. The DX just sounds very loud at times, and there's not much you can do about it. Now, for some species that's not going to be a massive problem, but there are certain species where it is definitely an issue and it will affect your photography. The subject will react to the sound of the shutter. With the mirrorless camera, you've got mechanical shutter, which is very quiet. And then you've got electronic shutter as well, which to me pretty much makes no sound at all, just a very slight faint sound. As well as that, I think it's good if you're in a hide. I think these days so many people are using mirrorless cameras. If you're in a hide with a noisy DSLR, maybe it can be a bit off-putting, you feel a bit self-conscious. And if I'm doing one-to-one sessions with people in the bird photography hide, for example, and it's definitely going to be better that my camera doesn't make an absolute racket. So definitely one of the biggest factors for me was the noise that the camera makes, or rather doesn't make. Now, what about the autofocus capability? With an old DSLR, can you take pin-sharp pictures of wildlife? Well, yes, I say absolutely you can, but it's generally going to be a bit more difficult. You probably have to work a little harder. If it's static, then there's probably not too many problems with the focus, but for anything moving, for birds in flight, for a running animal, and it's going to be a little bit harder. The Canon, the Mirrorless R6, like a lot of new mirrorless cameras, has eye autofocus, and that is basically where you get the focus point on the eye of the bird or the animal, and as long as you keep the focus engaged, then it keeps tracking it, stays on the eye and stays locked on. And I haven't used this camera massively yet, but I have used it out in the field, tested it out a bit, particularly with the focus, and I'm really impressed. I knew it was going to be good, but I'm very impressed with how that eye autofocus works, how it tracks. It sticks to it very well most of the time. It's not absolutely perfect. I'll talk about that another time. But yeah, it definitely does a good job. And at the moment, I've actually got two back buttons set up for the focus. One of which, I know what you're going to say, one of which is the eye autofocus option, and the other is just to go to a single focus point, so kind of like in the older style of tracking autofocus that you would do with a DSLR. Now yes, I did actually say I was using back button focus. I know some people there probably choked on the cornflakes because I'm not a fan of back button, but what I am going to do is to try back button focus with this camera for a little while, simply because it's a different camera and it's smaller, it's easier to operate. I'm not saying I'll stick to it, but I'm going to give it a go. It does make a lot of sense as well how you can assign the buttons as I've done, so you've got two options there for the autofocus, but at the moment I am actually using back button focus. One of the things I mentioned in the previous video was how important the video capability was and how that would be useful for me personally. Now I didn't expand on that, which I'm going to do now. And basically it comes down to getting wildlife footage and B-roll, which is quite important for what I do. So the YouTube videos, that's incorporated into the videos at times. So getting wildlife footage is really, really important to me. Now on the Canon 1DX, to activate the video, it's just a really slow system. So to activate the video, I'd have to press a button to lock the mirror up, and that would take nearly like 2 seconds, and then I could go into filming. And also it was manual focus, so anything you saw filmed with the 1DX wildlife footage was all on manual focus. It didn't even track. Now this camera is just so much better. I've used it a bit for video already, mostly on static feeding birds, and the tracking autofocus has been fantastic. Really happy with that. But I think the main advantage for me here is going to be how quickly I can switch from stills to video. So a lot of people might not want to do that, and it's much more about the stills, which is fine. For me, out in the field, sometimes I want to be able to, I'm taking pictures, but I want to be able to do some video as well. I want to record some footage. This is now fantastic for this. It means I can literally be out there doing some stills photography, handheld, and then really just press one button and I can go into filming straight away to get that footage. Now it's not ideal. Ideally I want to be on the tripod, on the fluid head, and do everything properly for wildlife filming. But if I am out in the field and I just want to get some of that footage to mix in the video, then I can do that. And also with the built-in IBIS, the stabilization, it's going to help more with that as well. So please could I ask you to do me a favor, because YouTube is not really pushing my videos very much at the moment, and that's just to make sure that you've clicked for notifications. So hopefully you've already subscribed to the channel. Once you've done that, just click on that bell icon, and then if you just click on the option there for all notifications, click on that, and that should send you a notification each time I upload a new video. If you're using an app, then you might need to make sure that you've got notifications enabled as well. There are two things that I did not mention in the other video that give me an advantage with the mirrorless camera. One of those is the in-viewfinder histogram. So this is not something that's always going to be necessary. If you have time, there's nothing wrong with reviewing the back of the camera, checking exposure, checking the histogram. That's absolutely fine. But with wildlife photography, sometimes you don't have that amount of time. So that's going to be really, really useful. Looking through the viewfinder, getting real-time information of my exposure, histogram, particularly with the whites, making sure that the whites aren't blown out off the end of the histogram. So I think I'll be able to adjust the exposure a bit quicker and probably make less mistakes overall. So that's definitely an advantage of the camera. The other thing that for some reason I never mentioned, which I actually think is really, really important, and that is to do with the focus area, the focus coverage. With the DSLRs, they've got more focus points over the years, but they're really still quite close to the center. Yes, they have some further out, but they're largely around the middle, and you just don't get focus points that go out towards the edge of the viewfinder. It's something they've never been able to do, probably something to do with physics that I'm really not that interested in. But this is an advantage with this mirrorless camera. I can pretty much get the focus point anywhere in the entire viewfinder. It's really good coverage. Now, why does that matter? Well, it matters for me in terms of composition. So there's sometimes where I might want to compose the animal or the bird very much to one frame, side of the frame, or quite extreme, maybe really far at the top or at the bottom of my composition, and that's going to make this so much easier. It's much harder to do that with DSLR. With this mirrorless system now, I think it's going to be easier for me to compose in that way. I've talked a lot about this camera, but I haven't talked about lenses. So I'm simply going to be using my EF lenses with this R6 for now. That's what I'm going to be doing. I haven't had a lot of chance to use the big lenses, but I did use a wide angle and a standard lens to do some street photography in Romania, and they just worked absolutely fine. I had no issues, and sharpness was absolutely fine, and if anything I felt that the focus was slightly faster. I know there's been lots of tests, including some YouTubers who do some really good tests with the EF lenses and the mirrorless camera systems, and they do seem to work very, very well. Now I'm aware there's a couple of issues using that system, so you might not be able to get the full frames per second, or maybe the focus preset button doesn't work. I've never used it, so those two things don't really bother me too much. So I'm going to be using with the EF lenses and the adapter, because you have to have the adapter for the two to work. And some people might be wondering why I didn't buy an R6 Mark II. I think really it just comes down to, you know, what you need at any given time. The R6 Mark II might have a few advantages, but I think this original R6 for me is going to give me the improvements, the advantages that I'm looking for. And also I got such a good deal on this, I just couldn't really turn it down. And also I'd say, you know, most of us can't buy whatever we want whenever we want to buy it, and personally the extra money I'd rather put that into getting experiences through traveling, for example, which is a big part of my life. And really the experiences and the memories that you create I think are so important. It's not all about gear, and if I was to choose between a slight increase in image quality and having more experiences to remember for the rest of my life, then it would be an easy choice for me. I haven't talked at all about image quality in relation to this camera, the R6. Now, did I buy this camera for an increase in image quality? No, absolutely not. I've mentioned it in social media. I've done a few image comparisons with my original Canon 1DX. Now, I could talk about it for longer, but what I'd say is, keeping it really simple, they are just very, very similar. The image quality between these two cameras, and yes, they have different lenses, but the image quality is just remarkably similar in pretty much every way. So if you're thinking of upgrading to an R6 for better image quality from a DX, personally I'd say you're not going to notice much difference. It's probably not worth doing. I did look at some images. I looked at some images on the screen on my computer to try and see the differences. Could I find some differences between the R6 and the DX with different lenses on? And I had a good look and zooming in and looking in the backgrounds, looking at noise, just trying to assess image quality. And really, maybe I pick a few things here and there, but it was so slight to me, to my eye, that I really just don't see much difference at all. So image quality wise, not much difference, but what you do get with a camera like this is functionality, and that's what it's all about for me. Is about functionality, about what it can do in the field, making my life easier when I'm photographing, increasing my hit rate in terms of focus, maybe with exposure as well, making it easier to carry. So it's just all about making it easier to photograph wildlife in the field. I will of course be updating you as to how I get on with this camera. I'm really excited in using this new system and setting it up for how I want. So I'll let you know how I get on with the lenses, with the focus system, and just the wildlife photography in general. If you have any thoughts on this camera or maybe the DX, then let me know in the comments box below. Thanks very much for watching. I'll see you next time.